Join Jesus where he's already at work. We dream of the day where every home in America is adopted by one or more persons living the prayer, care, share lifestyle. Our host, Gary Kendall, began Love KC with the desire to see every home in Kansas City prayed for. Join with him to make this happen. Now, on to the Bless Podcast. Okay, well, welcome to the Bless Podcast. My name is Brooke Powell. I work in communications with Love KC, and I don't need to introduce Gary, but here's Gary Kendall as well. We're going to actually be interviewing him today here in just a minute, and also Jade Van Slyke. And Jade works with, what is your actual title, Jade?
I'm Community Relations Director. I have the privilege and opportunity to get to work with Love KC as well, and it's such an honor.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks so much. So, we welcome to the Blessed Podcast, where we join Jesus where he's at work, where we live, learn, work, and play. We promote a pray, care, share lifestyle of living on mission. And we have a group on Facebook. So if you're listening and you're new, we have a group on Facebook called Love KC Living on Mission. And so you can go there. We have all kinds of tools to help you live on mission there. And as well as audio, we have it on Spotify, iTunes, and Google Play. So, and then if you haven't signed up for Bless Every Home, maybe you've been hearing about that, but you haven't signed up for that yet, you can go to lovekc.net/Bless Every Home, and you can sign up there. And then also, we also send out emails. So we have a lot of information. So if you want to sign up for our emails, you can go to lovekc.net, and it should be on there. So, well, Gary, I don't need to give much of an introduction, but
Hi, Jade.
Thanks so much for being here today. And for those maybe who are new, maybe you could catch them up and give a recap of the history of Love KC.
Sure. This is fun, kind of turning the tables on the way we typically do this, isn't it?
Yes.
So, I'm glad to share a little bit about Love KC today and help people who are new to catch up on a little bit of the past. Maybe that'll also help explain a little bit of why we do what we do today. And then also people who have been here to remember some of the ways that God has worked and the ways that God has provided for us. So it really started when Belinda, my wife, and I were at Indian Creek Community Church, and we had the privilege of starting the church from scratch, from 7 families sitting in a living room talking about what God wanted to do in our lives. And then that turned into the beginning of a church plant. And then the church plant grew 11 years in schools. And then we finally started building out on Black Bob Road in Olathe, Kansas. And from there, we spent another 20 years building 3 different phases of Indian Creek and eventually planting 2 campuses from there. So that was quite a run, 32 years. And wow. I would say the last 3 to 4 years, as we were getting to a point where we felt like it would be valuable for the church to turn it over to a younger pastor that would have a really good, 10, 15-year run left in them. At the very same time, we were feeling like there was something different for us. And the way we began to think about it was that we would ask ourselves this question: if we have another chapter to give in our life, maybe it's the 4th quarter of our life or something like that, if we have another chapter to give, then how would we want to spend that? As we prayed and thought and we began to ask God, and we didn't have a reason we had to leave, we really felt like if there's something we can do on the kind of the other side of the fence. We've been on this one side of the fence where we've been serving a local church and helping people grow there and become disciples who make disciples in a local church setting. But I wonder if we could help pastors like all around the city to be able to do something similar. And we felt like there was a great need in evangelism, prayer, and discipleship. And we kind of see these as like intertwined. But the key thing was we just felt this big growing conviction that a lot of church pastors are really running hard because Sunday comes every 7 days. And it's really challenging to keep evangelism, prayer, and discipleship at the forefront of everything because there's so many entities vying for the program and the time and the space in the church, whether it's communications or whether it's Sundays or just the programming throughout the week. And we felt like it was a gift we could give to pastors and church leaders across the city to be able to really lift up this important. We believe it's a priority for the church. So as that all was coming to pass, we were stepping down. The feeling was just so strong in us, we almost couldn't not do it. Sometimes it's not just what you feel led to do; it's what you can't not do. And that was the feeling there, that we just believed God was in it. So in September of 2017, we stepped out and started. Actually, it was September 11th, kind of a day everybody can remember. That was the first day that I worked at an office over at the Plex Pod in Lenexa and began working on Love KC. One of the fun things that happened early on was there was a couple of things that were clear in our mind. One was we wanted people who were followers of Jesus to be able to live their faith with confidence and know what to say to their friends about Jesus. One of the things we just had learned over time was there was a whole lot of believers who really wanted to reach their friends for Jesus. They just didn't know how. And there wasn't a matter of not a want to. They had a want to. In fact, they often tried, but they didn't feel like it. They were confident or didn't feel like, and part of that's because our world's been changing. The culture's been changing and they weren't sure what to say or what not to say. So I thought that would kind of be the first place to begin, help people live their faith with confidence. So they really look like following Jesus is fun. Like it really is that John 10:10 life that is more abundant that Jesus talked about. And then if they got the chance, what would it look like to be able to share their faith with Jesus? And I was pretty sure that it was going to be more of a stepwise process. That first we're learning how to make friends for Jesus. We're learning how to share our life with our friends. And then we're learning eventually how to share our story or the story of Jesus. So that's where the pray, care, share idea came from. I actually heard it from Mission America years and years ago, but settled on the fact that the three words sound alike and they really go together: pray, care, and share. You don't always have to do them in the same order, but I think they're three parts of the same process. And so I began doing a lot of writing in the early days. I wrote the online discipleship guide that's on our website now. I also wrote a book that the American Bible Society published called A Field Guide for Loving Your Neighborhood. And I was really thrilled that they were willing to publish that and pay for the first 5,000 copies. And so we gave away 5,000 copies in about a year. But that was fun to write that. It's still fun to share it with people electronically. We have it on our website as a resource. Mm-hmm. During that time, one of the things that I became convicted of was I really thought we need a way to keep track of who's adopting their neighborhood, because that was a terminology we started using that fall, like adopt your neighborhood, prayer walk your neighborhood, pray, care, share in your neighborhood, et cetera. Those were the kinds of phrases we were using in those days, and felt convicted about that. But I was just trying to figure out, how am I going to keep track of all this, like on a spreadsheet, or, like how many neighborhoods are there in Kansas City? I didn't even know. And one day I was praying downstairs and I just thought I heard a prompting from God say, go find Chris Cooper. And I thought, man, I haven't seen or heard of Chris Cooper in probably 10 years. And I have no idea where he is. And in a little bit of a smart aleck voice that God corrected me for later, kind of said, well, if that's really you, God, why don't you tell me where Chris Cooper is? Because I'll be glad to go find him. I just don't know where to start. And that was kind of the end of that conversation. So I went upstairs and felt a little bit of a rebuke. And I told Belinda what I said, hey, I think God just told me to go find Chris Cooper. And she goes, well, good luck with that one. So maybe she got a rebuke too. I don't know. But anyway, I went out the door kind of laughing at that, just thinking, oh man, God gives us some funny assignments sometimes. I drove across town, went to a convention over at the YWAM base, went into a dark room and sat down. Mark Anderson was on the stage presenting. And the person I couldn't see because my eyes were still adjusting to the dark. The person who sat beside me reached out their hand and said, are you Gary Kendall? And I said, yeah. And I still couldn't see very good. And I looked closer and I said, Chris Cooper? I went into a dark room and sat down by Chris Cooper, who I hadn't seen for 10 years and didn't even know he was in town. So you got to believe that God has a sense of humor.
I think
And
he was laughing at that one, like,
yes, for sure. So
Yeah.
I said, I leaned over. I didn't know if he was going to be there for just like, to lunch or when, but I knew I couldn't let him get away. So I said, I need to have lunch with you. And he goes, why? And I said, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I'm just supposed to find you. And he looked at me really funny. And he goes, well, I have lunch plans. And I said, can I join you anyway? And he looked at me really funny again. And he goes, well, I'll ask the other person. And so he texts and he goes, yeah, you can come. So it turns out it was Kathy Brenzel, who was leading a ministry in the US called Love 2020. And so we sat down across the table from each other while Chris paid for the food. And Kathy goes, so why did you want to talk to Chris? By the way, Kathy's also now the director of the National Day of Prayer. She wasn't at that time, but she says, why did you want to talk to Chris? And I said, I don't know. She looked at me really strange. And she said, well, what have you been doing recently? And so I told her about leaving Indian Creek and stuff. And then I told her about our ideas for Kansas City. And she started laughing and she goes, oh, I know why you need to talk to Chris. You're gonna like this, is what that's the way she said it. So Chris sat down and started talking, and I showing him, telling him, drawing on a piece of paper what we wanted to do. And he started smiling really big because the last 10 years of his life, he had moved to Orlando. That's why I hadn't seen him. And he had been working on a plan so that every neighborhood in the whole United States could be adopted. And he already had the maps. He already had a way to keep track of lights, and is already a well defined system. Actually, I just had tears in my eyes, and I said, Chris, what's really weird is I haven't met anybody so far in my whole life that wanted to do what we feel called to do. And Kathy spoke up and she goes, the network I lead is a network of city leaders. There's at least 40 other cities who are trying to do something similar to what you're trying to do. I can connect you to those other leaders. So I was sitting right across from the two people I needed to be sitting across to have this big vision with really not knowing what to do with it. And so Chris Cooper and I and Kathy Brenzel and I both, we've become really good friends and communicate often with each other, in the 4 years since. But that's kind of how God got us off to the start of adopting your neighborhood and having a good way to keep track of it. It's a fun story to tell.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
I was just thinking when you were talking how God needed to choose a pastor to carry this vision of Love KC, because exactly the obstacles, the challenges, what it takes to mobilize a church and through a pastor. And I think that's too why Love KC has been so successful, because you say a lot, keeping it simple. This isn't this long drawn out thing that a pastor has to give all this time to. It's there's really simple tools. It's easy to pass along. And so I just, you're the perfect person for the hour.
Well, I'm trying to grow every day, Brooke, but thank you.
Yeah.
There's a lot to keep up with this in this changing world, but yes, keeping it simple is a key.
You've done a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. And how kind of the Father to just bring, Chris Cooper, Kathy. I mean, it's just amazing just to see the kindness and just the generosity of the Lord, just in his timing for it to
couldn't be any two better
people.
people.
You can't make this kind of stuff up,
No.
and
Right.
and how God just really prepared you for this in so many ways, that you would, be leading in the city and have a heart for the city, long before this was even dreamt up, and long before God would even put this dream in your heart,
Right.
for something quite like Love KC, that he would give you this vision for city leadership and what that looks like for unity among churches. And I think that's just really amazing to see just the plans to really prosper and to grow, and how that was so true in your life. So I'd love for listeners just to hear a little bit about what's next and what's on the horizon for Love KC in this next season of ministry.
Sure. I mean, I think it gets more exciting every day. I mean, to be honest, the last number I looked at, and this is a month old, so I need to get this number updated, but the last number I saw was 3,224 lights in Kansas City for people who are adopting their neighborhoods to pray, care, and share. Or the way I like to say it is live on mission. When I say live on mission, then I I can include the realities that it happens where we live, learn, work, and play. Like living on mission, I think in the neighborhood's the right place and best place to start, but there's also a mission field at your workplace for most people, and a mission field with your in-laws for some people, with your extended family and your friends, and your whole sphere of influence is where God wants us to serve. So 3,224 and growing at an average of 50 neighborhoods added a month. And that's over 4 years. So that's not like it's just been growing that much in the last bit. That's the average over 4 years.
Wow.
And so what I always say is that's friends telling friends. We're not smart enough in Love KC or good enough in the way that we recruit people to take credit for all of that. That is friends telling friends. And that's the organic way, really, the body of Christ should grow. So the city is 14% adopted. If you think about each family praying, each light praying for 40 neighbor names, then we're 14% of the population of Kansas City is adopted, which is amazing. And I'm really curious, because if anyone's read the book, The Tipping Point, Malcolm Gladwell's book, he says that there's a tipping point somewhere between 15 and 18% for most things in this world. That once you hit that number, that it sort of becomes the norm, that this is the way you do things. So I would love it to become a norm in Kansas City that every believer would adopt their neighborhood and live on mission. And I actually think that if that doesn't happen, there's no way we can reach our culture, because by and large, people today are not going to churches if they don't go on the arm of a friend. And so we need to be able to have every friend be out there having their hand out for Jesus, like saying, come with me. And we know that in many cases, they just won't go if they're not familiar with the church until they have other aspects of that friendship in place. There has to be trust. There has to be some communication that's simple enough that they don't feel overwhelmed. It has to feel a little bit more like a pull than a push. And what I mean by that is a pull is something that they're interested in versus us trying to push it. I like to say these conversations should be a little more like playing ping pong, that when you hit the ball, the game continues when the other person hits it back. And then you hit it again and they hit it back. And if at some point you feel like you're the only one hitting the ball or you're the only one cheering, you probably should slow down a little bit because they're not quite ready. But when you find them asking questions and you find them leaning in, at that point you can ask them out for coffee, or you can have them over to your home, or you can invite them to a group at your church. Maybe they want to join a group first, or maybe they want to actually go to a service. But at some point, I think in the future, in the past, it used to be churches would say, come and see, you get them to the church and we'll tell them the gospel. And people were accepting Christ at the church. I don't think it's going to be that way in the future. Right. I mean, there will be people who accept Christ at churches, but I think that we need to not only be able to do everything I've said so far, but be able to share our story and the story of Jesus. So we're quite convicted about helping people to do those two things. But Jay, when you ask what's happening now, I think the thing that has really caught my attention this last year is that across the city, I think there's receptivity toward this message that we're talking about. And the churches, whether they're traditional churches or whether they're some of the newer micro churches that are kind of the new paradigm springing up everywhere, I think people really are realizing, I need to be the front line of defense for Jesus and the kingdom of heaven and not my church. So how do I do that? And so we've been talking about dividing the city into 5 regions, a north of the river region, then the state line being dividing the rest of the city, and having a north and a south on the east side for KCMO and for the Jackson County Lee Summit area, and then a north and a south on the Kansas side, a Wyandotte and a Johns County area. And then looking for people who will be willing to be leaders in those regions to help people, not just with the things we talked about today, like prayer and evangelism and discipleship, but also compassion and justice and the starting of new communities. And then being able to say, it's these things that will not only bring health to our city and vitality, but it's also these things which help us attract the finish line to the Great Commission. So how do we do it together? And I think one single shot across the city hasn't worked for most networks. But what can we do regionally? Because regionally, people have skin in the game. Regionally, if we divide a region, like let's say we're talking about the Johnson County, which we call Region 4 of Kansas City. So Johnson County has 2 zip codes. So eventually, let's find out what's happening in Region 4. Where are we winning? Where are there points of pain, and how can we rally to that? And then let's subdivide it into zip codes eventually. And then let's subdivide it into school districts, for even further, until we can really say that we are reaching every person in Kansas City. And we often pray this prayer, God, would you help every neighborhood in Kansas City be adopted? Would you help us pray for every family in the city by name? And then would you please provide so that every single person who's in Kansas City can hear the good news from a friend? And I don't think there's any way for us to track that or support that prayer if we don't begin to measure. And if the measurements are so big, it's a whole city measurement and not a regional measurement or a measurement that you can break down into, say, a school district, then, and I'm talking about grade schools when I say a school district, then I think it's going to be really hard to track. And whatever you can't measure, you don't know if you're making progress or not. So the most recent thing we've been doing is try to leverage the relationships that we've built over time. And I call it being leaven in the loaf. Cities by and large have not been thinking this way until more recently. But Eric Swanson, my good friend, we've had him on a couple of times. Eric Swanson will say, remember, Gary, that God talked more about cities than he did about the church in the New Testament. The church is only mentioned twice. And he says, so cities are mentioned all the time, Old and New Testament. God thinks about a city as one. His body in the city is one body. And I really hadn't considered that, and then the other thing is when we talk about the church, we're talking about the people, not the program or the building, but the people. And so the people are everywhere. We're one church in Kansas City. And let's begin to work together and see, that we are better together, and let's reach this city for Jesus. I don't know that there's too many cities that have ever tried to do what we're doing, but there are 2 or 3 now that have actually followed a very similar kind of plan to what we're doing. And I'm tracking closely with those leaders. So I'm more excited than I've ever been about the message of Love KC and about the way that God is giving us favor across the city, and many others are leaning into this same kind of need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think the closer we get to the Lord's return, this is going to become more and more popular, because I like what you said. It's gone from a come and see to a go and tell. And it's not that you're never going to invite anyone to church, but it just shows the importance of building that relationship, at your home, at your workplace, at schools. And that's really that's like the breeding ground of what's going to bring this fruit forth. And there's so many different ways to do that. And I agree, collectively as a body, so much more can be done than these little silos of churches. And it's exciting, especially what God's doing. And you have so many miracle stories, which we're going to get to some of those later. But I even was just thinking of the story, you can probably tell it better, just about the mayor. Someone went and had a meeting with the mayor, and what the mayor said. Would you want to share just what the mayor?
Sure. Yeah. Dave Runyon wrote a book about neighboring, and it was really the first book I'd ever read. About neighboring specifically. And in his book, he tells a story of meeting with the mayor in Denver, and they had brought a bunch of pastors together, and they brought the mayor in and wanted to ask him what the needs were from his viewpoint in the city and how that they could service churches. And he shocked them when he began to talk. The first thing he began to talk about was saying, you know what, if people would just love their neighbors, it would change the city of Denver. And he starts going on about how little regard people seem to have for each other, how they don't know their neighbors, they don't help each other, and how that in America, there used to be extended families, and people would, do a barn building, and people would come from all over to help them build their barn. And we just don't have any more of that. And he goes, if anybody should have that, you should have it. And like he didn't even realize that the two great commandments are love God and love your neighbors. So he wasn't like quoting scripture. He's just talking about life, that just
Wow.
simple life that we could change Denver if people would just love their neighbor. And Dave was saying, I never felt more like convicted by the Holy Spirit. Like we're the ones who should have this message, and this mayor who doesn't know Jesus is challenging the church to love their neighbor. And so that's kind of what began Dave's story in Denver.
Wow. That's incredible. Thanks so much for sharing just kind of an up to date. And so, speaking of up to date, we've been hearing more about the Send that's coming in May. And so, if you want to talk about that and just how Love KC is going to participate in that, I think that would be great for our listeners to hear.
Sure. Brooke, I want to say one thing I didn't say earlier. I thought of it when you were talking about how great it is that God gives each one of us something to do. One of my favorite things about the idea of living on mission is everybody gets to play. Like this isn't something that only pastors can do. You don't have to go to seminary to do this. Anybody can do it. Like our kids have invited our neighbors when they were younger. Our kids were some of the best evangelists with their team members and sports and things like. Everybody can do this. This is sustainable, and it's scalable because anybody can do it. Now, I like to say that the very simplest, most important part of following Jesus is to do what he said when he said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." I guess we even have to ask, are we really a disciple if we're not being a fisher of men? Like if we're just a participant or consumer of Christian goods and services, are we a believer but not a disciple? I'm not sure. I think that's an important question to ask. But the way Jesus designed it, like the everyday person gets to be the hero, because I love this study that I saw years ago. And I forget now who did this study, but 70% of the people who came to Jesus came because of the invitation of a friend or a relative. And they didn't come because of a pastor or a sermon or an evangelist on TV or something else. It's because of a everyday person. So I love it that the everyday person is the hero, and that they get to play just like anybody else. In fact, they're probably actually better. Most people would turn to a friend before they would turn to a pastor these days. And that's not to say anything bad about the pastor. They just don't know the pastor. So they're going to turn to a friend first, even before a counselor in many cases. But what's new in Kansas City is pretty exciting. And some of our listeners have heard this story, and some of them are in Kansas City. Some of our listeners are other parts of the nation. Even we have some around the world, which is exciting. But the principles we're talking about here work anywhere. You don't have to be in Kansas City for them to work. I think loving your neighbor is one of the oldest ways God has had his people care for the people around them. And anywhere that happens, the kingdom of heaven begins to flourish in that area. The people flourish and the city flourishes. Jeremiah talked about that way back in the Old Testament. But the Send is a group that's coming to Kansas City and praying and hoping to fill Arrowhead Stadium. They're using the number of 60,000 people on May the 14th, and that's a Saturday in May. The interesting thing is they already have 30,000 registrations. So I don't know if they'll all make it, but they have 60, 70 days to go. So they may do it. That would be awesome. Like to have a big stadium event. But I've never been personally as motivated toward like a one and done stadium event as I have been toward the things that actually will last and be sustainable and grow and really bless what's already happening in the city. And one of the things that they've done is marry the two events. So the week leading up to the Send, the stadium event, they're having what they call the Flood, where there'll be ministry opportunities happening all over the whole city of Kansas City. There's 1,000 people coming in to serve at the stadium event, and they're coming in a week early, and they're going to be ready to serve. So all across town, there's going to be a lot of different activities and ways that people can serve and live on mission. And plans are being made now in all 5 regions to do a variety of different kinds of things. And we'd probably spend the rest of our time talking about the Send or the Flood if we went into great detail. But part of what's cool and how it relates to Love KC is that one of their go-to plans, so their action plans, at the end of it is to be able to give people 5 different choices of ways uh, to go live this out. And it's like an application to what they've been hearing. And so there's 5 different ways. One of them is starting an evangelism club in the high schools, and they're going to use Claim Your Campus for that. And it's a national ministry that helps people in their local high schools to be able to pray, to meet, to encourage each other, and to learn how to share Jesus. So that's a cool action plan. Another one is to go in and challenge the people there to adopt every single child that's in foster care in this city, and to support foster care and adoptive families. So love that. Another one is to be able to do compassion and justice for the least, the last, and the lost, to be able to go meet tangible needs in the city. So all across the city of Kansas City, CityServe will be partnering, certainly in every one of the 5 regions, with a hub where they can give away gifts in kind, and where individual churches can be a pod or a point of distribution, and they can give away these gifts in kind at a block party. And then they can add other things to that. Maybe they add that they're giving away food, or maybe they're giving away clothes, or both, or maybe there's some worship, or there's something that's fun happening, bouncy houses and games and other kinds of things, a carnival-like atmosphere or something. And then they're looking to have a prayer tent where people can be prayed for, and then to some way to share the gospel in all of these different places. So that's all pretty exciting. And we've planned for several weeks now to team up with CityServe to help them find the right hubs around town in the regions, and then churches that can be pods. And we've agreed to use kind of our network of friends and churches and communication to say, hey, we'll help you find these things. We can't orchestrate all of it, but we can supply Love KC volunteers to them and support the work. So that we've been planning on that. But another one is another action plan is for people to go to the unreached people groups of the world. So there'll be a big deal about sending. That's why it's called sending this generation. They're saying their war cry for the event is, we're going to declare. I just lost the name of it. A war on inactivity. That's what it is. A war on inactivity. So everybody involved. But the 5th one is probably where I'll take just a minute and talk about a little bit more, because it's called communities, or being active in your community. And being active in your community really is, the same thing we call neighboring. And they've asked Love KC to take a leading role in connecting communities. And so people will have 1 of 5 things to sign up for. They'll text in from the stadium, I want to be a part of 1 or more of these. And then the send is going to be sending those names and emails and contact information to Love KC. And they're encouraging people to do 1 of 3 things or all of 3 things when it relates to neighboring. And that's to adopt your neighborhood, to pray, care, and share. It's to be a part of an alpha in your neighborhood, where you could join with perhaps friends in the same neighborhood, or friends from your small group, or from your church, or you can even do it online and begin to help that person walk in the alpha journey of starting to get questions answered and meet Christ followers. It's really the very best way that I know of for people to kind of get a taste of what Christianity is like in a safe setting and ask their questions. So neighboring alpha, and then get training to be a missionary and live the missionary lifestyle from Underground KC Underground. And you could use that either to start a micro church and be a part of one, or join a micro church, which is basically a group that meets in a home on, it could be Sunday, or it could be any day of the week, but they live on mission, and then they meet in a home to gather and support each other. And there's some worship and teaching, but it's not meant to be a church that's like repeating a service on Sunday. It's more like the body being the body to each other and loving each other, and then going out on mission every day of the week. So the training under Love KC, under Underground KC, would be provided by their leadership. So I met with the Alpha group leaders today and have been exchanging texts with Rob Wagner. We would like the neighboring initiative to be as seamless as possible, so that when you say we want to live on mission in our neighborhood, that there's really here's the way we do it in Kansas City, and it involves all three of these things: adopting your neighborhood, connecting with Alpha, or at least knowing it's a resource, and then getting deeper training through KC Underground. So one landing page, one unified message, the trainings would be done together. And then there would be a couple different options. You could do them in the order of adopting your neighborhood first, then Alpha, then KC Underground, or you could do them in the reverse order or any order. Pick one or pick two or pick all three, but they're all parts of the same whole. We want to make it as simple and seamless as possible. So it's really, really a privilege to be asked to do this. When Johnny Gillespie presented it to me, he said, Gary, we probably will be directing 10,000 people your way, and probably 5,000, will actually take action. And, I felt two emotions at the same time, scared to death and super, super excited. And kind of what prepared me for this was, I didn't know that ask was coming, but on the same day, Wednesday morning, I woke up at like 3 a.m. and I was just thinking, why am I awake? Like, I don't usually wake up at this time, and I'm looking at the ceiling and hoping I can go back to sleep, but that doesn't seem like it's going to happen. So finally I said, God, is there something you want to tell me? Like, I'm awake. I'm here. Like, you have my full attention if you want to talk to me. And I didn't hear anything immediately, but like a few minutes went by, and then I thought I heard this prompting in my heart that I'm going to bring something to you, and when I do, I want you to keep your mind open to it. And I thought, that's an interesting way to say that. If that's from you, God, like, I mean, you could just say, I'm going to bring something, and say yes, but that really made me curious when he said it that way. But I think sometimes God says things like that so we know it's not from us. Like, I wouldn't have said it that way. So the fact that I heard it that way made me think, I didn't think of that. And there's no one else talking to me at that time of the night or morning, so I'm thinking, okay, God, well, what do you have? And so that I almost couldn't go back to sleep because I was just wondering what God was up to. And then I went to the meeting with Johnny. I didn't know what he wanted. And then he started telling me how we've chosen Love KC and Bless Every Home to be the neighboring initiative. And we want to ask you to train the 1,000 people who come early in neighboring. And then when the send is over, we want you to train the 5 or 10,000 who respond. Can you do that? And so, even though it's like an overwhelming thing to say yes to with 67 days to go, I felt like God had prepared me. So I said yes. So we're diving into that, and starting to make some plans. And one of the things that was exciting to me is like the 2 or 3 first phone calls I made were like to Alpha and to Rob with Jenna Gaddert, Lori Roy with Alpha, and then Rob Wagner with KC Underground. They were as excited as we were. And when I was pitching the idea of, hey, let's do it we'll have one response and we do it together, so we don't confuse people and overwhelm them with options. And they both go, yes, that's exactly what we should do. So I thought, thank you, God. Like, that kind of unity, that kind of cooperation is amazing. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what's the latest as of one day ago.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. And so neat just to see, I mean, just the true unity, not the competitive spirit or anything like that, but really leaders being for each other and for others in just such an amazing way. It's really has encouraged my heart so much just to see that and experience that. So curious how, I'm sure there's a lot of people that would love to get involved with this. I'm sure we're going to need help, and curious how people can get involved if they want to participate.
Yeah, that's great. That one-page landing page isn't done yet, Jade, but it will be. I think it would be easy for people to get involved now if they have an interest. They could just go to lovekc.net, and there they can sign up to receive I like to think of that action on our part as mobilizing people. I don't know that people want their inbox filled up with things, and we try to be careful not to overdo that. We do want to tell stories. we want people to hear answers to prayer, and we want to be able to share important information. So we try to do that judiciously, and we use social media sometimes instead of email, so they can find it there. But if they went to lovekc.net, they would get a chance as they opened up that URL to receive communication from Love KC. Another thing is, do watch the Love KC Living on Mission. It's over 1,000 people that participate on that page at one time or another, or at least have liked it and signed in on it. So we keep updates there. Brooke works really hard to keep those updates fresh and new. So anything that's coming up is likely going to show up there. We do have a Facebook page also, and there's plenty of information there. The Facebook page in all reality works a little more like a social media billboard. We really aren't looking for a lot of engagement there. If you ask a question, we'll answer it. But we really would love to hear your thoughts. Like, we want to have communication and dialogue and engagement on the Living on Mission page. So those are probably the easiest ways. As we get closer to the event, there'll be more opportunity to hear how to get involved. Anyone could go look at what the Send has to offer right now, the send.org, THESEND.org. And you can see they've just done really good, I think, with their promo for this event. They're really targeting the Gen X, Gen Z, and millennials. Those three generations are their primary target. And I think they've done a good job kind of capturing the spirit of what's happening in America today, and calling people to more of I think people want to be challenged to a faith that really requires their best. Like, I think that the day of giving a half-hearted thing and calling yourself a Christian isn't here anymore. If a person's kind of that way, they've gone all the way the other way. But people who have made the decision for Christ, I think they want to give their life to something that's really going to matter, something that's going to last, something that challenges them to give their best. And out of that, they really feel like, I'm all in. I think that's really the way that people are thinking about their faith these days. So we would love to be able to mobilize you to connect with others who feel the same.
I just want to jump into, Gary, and say, one way that you can participate even now before these updates come out is pray regularly for the Send. I remember it was several years ago, but I led a side room at the House of Prayer in Kansas City for the World Cup in Brazil. It was 2 years out. We were praying for the ministry that would happen there. And it was powerful. And I remember, I kind of even maybe forgot about it for a season. And then when it came, and then hearing testimonies that came from that, and I was just so blessed to know that I sowed seeds into what God did during that time. And so prayer is the foundation, of everything. And so if you could even just like one time a week up until May 14th, just say, I'm going to commit to pray. And I believe if you commit to do that, whoever wants to do that, that God will then give you maybe another task to help participate along the way. And so if we're faithful in prayer, then God sees our heart, and that, we're willing to do the hard thing, to pray for something. It may not be the most fun thing or whatever, but it's where the labor really is. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is fun.
It is fun.
I think prayer is fun.
It is, absolutely. So, okay, I know might be getting close to our time, but you did say that there was a lot of miracle stories with Love KC. So maybe if you just have one or two that you want to share.
Yeah. So one of them is quite, anybody who started something new knows the challenges that, when everything is new and you're just starting, it's like a person standing with all materials to build a home, and you're standing out there and you haven't even dug the foundation yet. I mean, that's what it feels like when you're getting started, and you just go, this is overwhelming, and you have to pay for it. So you have to figure out a way to raise funds and everything. And that's where we were in September of 2017. And the very first person I ever talked to about, I wasn't even asking this person for money. I was asking this person about, because I did know they had means, but I was really trying to find out, like, how if you were me, how would you approach people about Love KC? Because I'd love to just pick your brain on that. And we talked for probably half an hour in a parking lot. We were actually going somewhere else that day. And so he was helpful. And at the end, I was starting to walk away. I didn't ask him for money. And he goes, hey, by the way, like, when are you going to start? And I said, well, now. I mean, we have started. And he goes, has anyone given yet? And I said, no. And he goes, well, let me be there first. And he gave us $50,000 in next week and pledged to give 50,000 each of the next 2 years. So that was such an amazing confirmation that God was in that. And, God has met every need as we go along. We always have needs. We still have needs today. But when something like that happens, you just really know that God's in it. Yeah. Another one I wanted to tell is much more recent. And I'm going to say this with a little bit of, like, I need to probably give just a little bit of explanation before I tell the story. But Brooke, you mentioned prayer a minute ago. What I'm going to say next, I don't want to say it in any kind of way that would bring attention to myself or would make anyone think that, like, I'm, a prayer hero, because I'm not. I find that it's the most important thing I do every day, but it's also a day with discipline. It's not easy to stay focused. Like, my mind goes in 1,000 directions. Mm-hmm. And to get up early enough and make time to make prayer your priority, mm-hmm. I think is the most important thing any one of us can do, but it's not easy. So I'm sleepy a lot of days. Sometimes I'm feeling like it's just feels like a little bit like a routine. I try for it not to be like that, but so I journal and I read the Bible on my phone and do a variety of things to kind of help that practice. But I think it's the very most important practice of all. I would say that really any idea I've ever had, or any thought I've thought that's been profitable in ministry, and includes the church and Love KC, has really come through that time of prayer. Like, it either came in a quiet time when I was alone like that, or on a prayer walk, or it came like at a worship service when I wasn't even thinking about something. It's funny, 6 months ago, toward the end of last year, I just had this real big sense from God. And I know I told you about this, Brooke, when it happened, that God was going to do something really special, and I didn't know what it was. And it came just from what I'm talking about right at this moment. But what I want to share is like, for the last 40 days, just recently, right up until just a week ago, I was fasting and praying, and I was using the Daniel fast, where no meats, no fine foods, no, nothing sweet, no alcohol. And so you might think, well, you still can find things to eat. You can, but it's not all that exciting, to be truthful. And often I feel like I didn't have as much energy as I wished I would have had, because I wasn't getting a lot of protein. But putting all that aside, it wasn't easy, I guess, is what I want to say. And I'm not asking for credit for doing it. Like, this is not like, look at me or give me credit. I did it because I really wanted to hear from God. And every time I was hungry, I wanted to let the hunger remind me that I really need God more than anything in the world, more than I need food. And I wanted the 40 days because I wanted it to last long enough that I couldn't just go through it, check off the box, and say I did it. Like, this was going to be something that was going to take a lot of discipline over a long period of time. And I would have to really every day remind myself of, why am I doing this? And I'm doing it to seek after God. I'm doing it to hear his voice. I'm doing it to draw closer to him. And I can't say that every day I felt marvelous about it. Some days Belinda would tell you I was hungry and angry. And more than once I went through the house saying, I really don't like this. But at the same time, there was a shift that took place. About 30 days in, I began to feel this, like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like, I would just say a settled center inside of the core of my being. Like, we never really have enough money at Love KC. It's always a challenge. And sometimes I stress over that, and I just stopped feeling worried about that. Mm-hmm. Like, I know it's important, but I honestly, I felt like this peace that passes understanding, that guards your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And I felt this sweet sense of being really loved by God, not on what I was doing, not because I was doing this 40-day journey, but just because God loves his children. Like his grace is amazing and it's free and it's undeserved. And I didn't deserve it more because of this. I just felt overwhelmed by the goodness of God. And my journaling was getting longer and full of more thoughts. And I felt like I was hearing from God. And there would be time when one worship song, sometimes I'd play a worship song or two at the end because I want to try to do some listening to God. And if I don't actually have something, it's really hard to be quiet. I can't, my mind, I get too distracted. So I play a worship song or two, and I'd be sitting there with my journal open, listening to a worship song and just, really feeling like God was communicating to me and I actually tangibly feel his presence. And, I can't put a price on that. Like that to me, I didn't know about the new things that would open up for Love KC at that time. Mm-hmm. But I feel like when I was considering doing this fast, I did it with our church. Heartland had 1,200 people were fasting for 40 days or some version of that. So we did as a church together. But I didn't have like a goal except to be with God. And I just by the end of it, I thought, should I go 50 days? This was so good. Wow. Like by the time I was at the end of it, it's like, I really don't want to quit. Like this has just been marvelous. And I was asking God about that. I just felt like he was going, no, you said 40 and you did 40. I did it imperfectly, by the way. A couple of times I forgot and ate something before I realized, oh, wait, I'm not supposed to be eating that.
That's the worst. You got to stop.
I know, you feel guilty. But I knew that I didn't feel guilty from God. I just felt stupid. Like, how did I forget that?
Yeah.
But anyway, I said all of that just to say, I feel like that whatever we do with our life, like for me, it might be leading Love KC. For someone else, it might be showing up at their job every day. For someone else, it's going to their church and they have some role in their church. Or for someone else, it's loving their neighbors, like we already talked about. It can be anything in the world. But we aren't human doings, we're human beings. Mm-hmm. And the importance of just being with God, being quiet, being still, learning to listen, to trust that he knows best, and to repent. A lot of the times I would just sit and think about, God, what are the things I repeatedly do that don't bring you joy? What are the things I repeatedly do that cause strife in my family or in my relationships? Or what are ways where there's been too much Gary and not enough God in my work? Asking those questions regularly, not from a perspective of condemnation, but a perspective of how could I be sure I'm giving up everything I need to surrender? And how can I be sure I'm laying down anything that might be in the way? Those were joyful times. People talk about repentance sometimes as being like, you're going to have all these tears and you're going to be a mess mentally and emotionally, and it's going to be so hard. And it wasn't like that at all. Like it was sweet. So sweet. Like, God, how can I please you more? I just got to say that, I just think that whether you adopt your neighborhood or not, and I hope you do, I just really want to ask you to, if you just would spend time getting close to God, then you're going to want to get close to others, like love God, love your neighbor. That would be the most important message I can give anybody is if you set aside time to meet with God, he will meet with you. He said, my sheep hear my voice. They know my voice and they won't follow another. So if we're not hearing from God, if we're not sensing a manifest presence of God in our life, that is really so close and so tangible. It is possible for every one of us, and it can be yours. And it can start right away. You don't have to wait. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to deserve it, but get in his word, get in prayer, get alone with God, open your journal, give him a chance, and you will not regret it. And then you really have something to give away. Then you can operate from a full cup. Yeah. And people will know when they're around you, they just sense that there's something different. And that something different it's Jesus. So that's what the world needs. They don't need slicker presentations of the gospel. They don't need, for us to have better plans. They need for us to be with Jesus. And then they'll say the same thing that it was said of the disciples in their day. Like, we don't know where these guys came from, but we can tell they've been with Jesus. And that's the most important thing I can leave with anybody today.
That is so good and so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you, Gary. That was hard to follow, but I am wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to share with our listeners that you haven't already during our time.
I'll probably think of it when we get done.
Okay. Well, I felt like that was
Yeah, that was a great ending.
it was a great ending, really.
One of the things I've learned to say is I reserve the right to be smarter later.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was no, so true of who you are and your tenderness and your leadership too. So thank you for being such an amazing man of God and for seeking the Lord in all you do.
Yeah, this was fun. It's great to have
Yeah.
this conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it was
hope,
nice
I hope it helps.
Yes, it was nice to turn the tables and hear from you. I know you're on some podcasts, but just to hear your heart and, just to get back to the foundation of why you even do what you do and why Love KC exists, like this is the foundation. So thanks so much for sharing, Gary. This was awesome.
yeah,
So joy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining. And did you guys have anything else before we jump off here, Jade? All right. Well, thank you so much for joining in. And we will hopefully see you on our group. And you can, again, catch us on the podcast on our Love KC Living on Mission group, or you can go to Spotify, iTunes, or Google Play. So thanks so much. Oh, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, so you can continue to get more of this great information. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening from the folks at Love KC. We hope you enjoyed our program. See you next time.